Hi everyone. Hello, hello, hello. Welcome to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. My name is Brian Francis, as usual, the invisible voice inside your head. I hope you're all ready for some complicated gameplay today, because we are playing Opus Magnum. Opus Magnum is a puzzle game that was just released a couple weeks ago from Zachtronics. And the wonderful folks of Zachtronics, Zach Barth and Matthew Burns, who aren't all of Zachtronics, but they're some of them, are down there in the lower left-hand corner. Zach and Matt, can you say hi?
Hey.
Hello.
And Alex, you're not a Zachtronics employee. Who are you? Why are you here?
I'm just a man in a closet with a microphone. Sometimes I serve as an editor for Gamasutra.com, but today I am here to ask you two why this game. What is up with this game? It is it feels like every year there's a new Zachtronics puzzle game, and every year the story is this one is a little more accessible. It's got more characters. It's got a richer, more engaging storyline, and I always think it sounds really neat, and then I can't get past the tutorial. This game is different. I've gotten past 4 or 5 of the actual first chapter puzzles, and I'm very excited to have made it that far. Why did you... Well, before I ask why, do you feel like this project is more accessible than your prior works?
I think so.
Why?
The reception has definitely been that it is. I wouldn't say it's easier. It's just like less obstructionary, right? We have a lot of our games are. I guess most of our games are puzzle games, and they tend to have this quality where like our games are open ended. But for most of the ones in the past, it doesn't mean that you can just do anything to win. Like, you still have to meet these, like, the criteria of the puzzle in order to pass and go on to the next puzzle. And, like, oftentimes, like, there's a lot of constraints that come with just the sort of the base level challenge. And Shenzhen.io is a good example of this because you have to put stuff on a circuit board. But all of those circuit boards are finite in space, right? Aesthetically, that's an important part of putting stuff on circuit boards is that you don't get infinite board space. You have to make it fit in the package of the thing you're trying to do. And so, like, for me, like, that's like a non-negotiable thing. If you're going to make a game about circuit boards, they have to be finite. But it turns out that actually is a huge source of difficulty in that game, and it wasn't even necessarily intentional difficulty. I mean, for me, it was more of like an aesthetic choice than a saying like, oh, this game has to be hard because am I allowed to use profanity?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Because fuck our players, you know, like that's not how we think about it, right? And we were trying to go for something aesthetically, and it ended up being quite constraining. And with Opus Magnum, we didn't necessarily say we want this game to be easy. It was just that as we started, you know, we had to come up with something to make, and for years I've wanted to sort of reimagine what was basically like the first Zachtronics game, or the first Zachtronics style puzzle game, and which is the Codex of Alchemical Engineering, which is a Flash game I made years ago, which is terrible and no one should play it. But
you still can.
You still can, but you shouldn't. Just because you can doesn't mean you should. So once they kill off Flash, nobody will ever play it again, which is probably better because it's terrible. So
I think it's interesting. I think it's interesting to look at the Codex of Alchemical Engineering and just see 10 years of like design thought.
Look at it, but don't try to play it. We had some people who
play when maybe one level or something.
We had some people who were like, "Oh, this game's coming out. I have to play the old one to get ready." It's like, no, don't do that. It's really bad. There's a reason we've reimagined it and it's like a new user-friendly game. But so for years we've sort of had this idea on the back burner of like, what if we took that old game idea and then reimagined it as like a proper new Zachtronics game? And when we started building that, we realized like, wow, this game has less constraints, right? Like, there's no reason to make it a constrained board. We can make it infinite. We can allow people to like build their terrible solution and then like make it better after they've solved the puzzle with a terrible solution. And this is something that had sort of been in the back of our minds since Space Chem that I talked about it on Reddit, I think. After Space Chem came out, we, like Keith and I, who was like the other designer programmer who I've worked with for a long time, he was the other guy that I was in the tiny office with when we started Zachtronics. And the two of us went out to dinner with some tools developers from Bungie, and one of them said, like, hey, you know, I really like, you know, we really like Space Chem, but we're definitely not going to beat the game. Like, we tend to just play the early levels and then just try to optimize them as much as we can.
Yep.
And so ever since then, we thought, like, what if we made a game where, like, you could actually beat all the puzzles, but then optimizing them was interesting.
That's really funny because like I said, I've been able to make some progress, even a tiny amount, but it's hindered by the fact that all I want to do is go back to that first puzzle at the end of the tutorial where you first have the option to see leaderboards and get mine better than my friends. Like all I want to do is go back and just do it better and better and better. And that is sort of like pleasantly maddening. How do you balance, if you give any thought to that, how do you balance like the decision to show that kind of data that will encourage players to just constantly hone and refine their work versus trying to sort of guide them through a path of puzzles?
What do you mean? Can you clarify?
Yeah, so like I'm having personally as a player a lot of trouble like motivate myself to go back to the new puzzles because all I want to do is keep doing the old ones over and over to get better and better and better.
That's okay, right? Some players hate the leaderboards, it turns out, and some players don't hate them, but they're not strongly motivated by them. And for them, being able to play through the game is a challenge that they like. For some people, just love optimizing the early. Like even if we made the game so you could beat like most of the puzzles in it, if not all of them, and you're still choosing to optimize the very first optimizable puzzle. And I think that like that just proves how like compelling that force is. That even in a game where all the puzzles are easier, like it's still really fun to optimize literally the first puzzle. And I mean, we've had people who've claimed to have spent like 10 hours optimizing that one first puzzle. And it's hard to make an even simpler puzzle, right? I mean, it really is. Really, really simple. It's like we're gonna get to it soon in the stream. Yeah,
but it's totally
fun.
It's totally arresting. And I wonder, I haven't spent a lot of time thinking about this because again, this is not a genre that I have spent a lot of time playing. But like you clearly, both of you have spent years working on these kind of games, thinking about how these games flow and how to design them. What is it that you think is very attractive to players about the iterative process of like trying to solve a puzzle and then solve a puzzle better and more perfect? Like that's kind of the theme of the game, right? Is raising
part of
like
it,
base ideas and base concepts up to like a more pure version. What is it about that process that you think captures your players' attention?
I think different players have different motivations, right? Like some of them are really strongly motivated to beat their friends' leaderboard scores.
I'm going to disappear for a quick second.
Like, they really want to beat their friends' scores, right? And that's all they talk about. And then other players are not interested in the leaderboards at all, but they're really interested in optimizing their own solution, and they want to beat their previous score. And then I think some players are actually motivated by like the story, and they actually do just want to go through all the puzzles and like sort of see all the content in the game. So there's kind of a combination of like different motivations, and I think we try to make it. We try to make the game accommodating to all of those ways that you can experience the game.
Yeah, and just so everyone knows, it sounds like Zach and I both are a little bit under the weather, so apologies for any sudden stepaways or coughing or anything. But Matthew, actually, I have some specific questions I want to dig into with you because your work sort of permeates this project in a way that I sort of want to better understand. I know you did the music, and I know you did some writing. How else did you collaborate on this project, if you don't mind me asking?
So the way we started working at Zachtronics since Shenzhen IO is that Zach has this design space that he's working with puzzles. So in the case of Opus Magnum, there's this design space of like, here's this thing that we can do with alchemy, and here's this kind of world that we think this alchemy takes place in. And then there needs to be some sort of like reason to make all these different things that you're making. And so what we do is together we brainstorm all of these different ideas of like things that you could be making in this world, right? So like some of the products that show up in the first chapter, they have you making some really kind of like silly products for them, like hair gel and hangover cures and things like that. All of those are sort of brainstormed from like a story direction as well as like a mechanical direction, because Zach can sort of, if I say like, oh, there should be like some sort of like hangover cure, then we can like figure out what that is, what that means in the gameplay, what a molecule of that looks like. But all of those, like what those puzzles are sort of created with the story in mind as well, right? Like all of the puzzles in the first chapter are kind of telling you about the people that you work for. So it's this process where that's kind of that's generated where like I'll try to come up with like a whole bunch of like puzzle ideas and sort of pitches and be like, oh well, what if they needed to make like tar for their ships to like so their ships don't sink? What if they needed to make like fuel for their airship because they have an airship, because this is the kind of fictional world where airships exist, and so on, like trying to like filter with the broad concept of the world down into like what would the specific things be, and then translate those into like the actual mechanics of the game, and how would that be expressed in the mechanics of the game.
Sometimes I get really pedantic about that. Matthew will suggest something, I'm like, that's not a thing. Like, what you wanted to make like a special kind of ale. I'm just like, that's a combination of molecules. That's not a single molecule, Matthew. Jesus Christ. Sometimes I get really
like alcohol and something else.
It's a collaborative process.
It is.
I love talking about this stuff, and I don't want to forget about this because I want to link it back to your work on Shenzhen and sort of the progression of Zachtronics games. But I think Brian jumped in earlier to try and pull a question from the chat, so I'm just going to grab a good one or two. Let's see. Rivaro has a question. Are you using some kind of engine for each, or is each game created from scratch? And if that's the case, is the engine of your own creation? Sorry, I love technical details.
I can answer this question. I don't know how satisfying it's going to be. So, so for Space Chem and Ironclad Tactics, we used we just wrote code and it made a game. We've used C# since the beginning, and we still do. So it was C# to OpenGL with SDL. With Infinifactory and TIS-100, we had switched to Unity because that was when everybody was using Unity. We tried it out for a project. It turns out with Ironclad Tactics, we had a lot of problems we were writing platform code that didn't work well enough. And it turns out that OpenGL has terrible support on Windows. And we thought that was going to be our silver bullet. We write OpenGL, it runs everywhere. It turns out we're wrong. OpenGL support is terrible. So we sort of thought, maybe we're better off not writing platform code. So we switched to Unity. We made some games with that. But then it turned out we hated Unity too, because it gets in your way. Like we're seasoned game developers at this point. We don't need it holding our hands. We make 2D games, and they're 2D. We make UI based games, right? And they have a UI system, but it doesn't really give us the flexibility that we wanted. And so there was about a year where I shut down Zachtronics and went to work at Valve. And while I was doing that, Keith, he's like our main programmer and a designer, he was doing his own thing for a year. And I always describe it as he went up went up a mountain and came down a year later with this huge bushy mountain man beard and had discovered a new way to write games. And we still write our games in C#, but he'd been paying attention to what Casey Muratori was doing with his game engine writing stuff, and so now our game engine is just it's C#. It calls out to DirectX or OpenGL to draw stuff. It uses SDL for windowing and mouse inputs, and everything else is just one giant update loop in our game engine. And so even calling it an engine is not really true. It's it's a paradigm. It's great because there's all these things when we have one of the first things he added was live reloading, which is actually kind of tricky to do in C#, but he figured it out. And which means that if we have the game running and it's just in a state, we can change the code and then recompile, and then the game changes its code without losing its state. And it turns out that really cuts down on iteration time. And Unity is supposed to have this feature, but it never works. And so we have it, and it works perfectly. And we leverage it. All of our stuff is really laid out precisely by pixels. And so I can just wiggle stuff around in the game and then copy that back into the code, and then bam, it's there. We also have a thing where we can take any constant value in the engine and then wrap it in a function that lets us scrub it live in the game window. So if I'm trying to get the position of a window right, I wrap its position in this function, and then I can just drag the window around, and then when I let go, it pastes the new coordinates back into my clipboard, so that way I can just paste it back into the code, hit F6, and now it's just recompiled. I haven't had to exit the game, haven't had to restart. It's amazing. It's the best, right? I've used a bunch of different game engines, and it's literally, to be fair, we're in kind of a weird case because we make games that are almost entirely UI, but it's the best. It is really cool, and really we're really productive, and it's the best.
You're so ebullient about this, and it's exciting. Do you think if you didn't make games that were so focused on clicking buttons and dragging things to other things and connecting them together, if you made I don't want to say more traditional, but just a different kind of game, would you be more excited about the idea of using off-the-shelf engines, or is the time and effort that people like Keith put in on helping to refine your own systems just always more appealing?
The funny thing is that generally we would advise people against writing game engines, right?
Yeah.
Like a lot of people say, I'm going to make a game. First step, write a game engine. It's like, you are not going to ship your game. Like, don't do it. Like, you should use Unity. If we made Infinifactory again, we probably wouldn't use Unity because Keith really struggled to implement a lot of the stuff that we wanted to implement in Unity. It kind of kept getting in our way, and Keith is a good enough graphics programmer that it's maybe not necessary. If we wanted to do a whole bunch of, like, if we wanted to make a game that looked like it was in the Unity engine or the Unreal engine, you know, with all the god rays and shit, like, if we wanted to do that, I think we would probably just try to do that because that's stuff that maybe it's not worth re-implementing on our own. But until we start trying, we're never going to make games that look like that, right? Like, we'd be a different studio at that point. Like, who the hell knows?
Yeah, I mean, if you wanted to make Opus Magnum but in 4K and with HDR, like I feel like that would be it.
Even then, we'd probably still use our engine.
Yeah,
right.
sure.
I mean, like one of the limitations we've hit with Opus Magnum that we don't really have any plans to change because it basically involved like redoing the game, and I don't think it's worth it. But so we kind of target like 1080, but it turns out that there's like a 3x range of people's monitor resolutions. Right, you've got 4K on one end, you can't see it the webcam. There's 4K, and then there's like dank cheap laptop screens from 5 years ago they're still widescreen, but they're 1366 by 768. So there's this huge range of resolution, and we've been trying to figure out, like, our games are weird and not like other people's games. How do we solve this problem? And the way we've been doing it is that we try to make our primary game area scale, so that way when you set the resolution higher, it gets bigger. But then like our core UI stays one size, so we don't have to like design a bunch of different versions of it. But like that is not working. Like our story screen, if you run the game at 4K, our story screen is like this big inside of it. And for a while, we still had the little legs. Like some of the UIs in this game come up on little legs, and so that like there'd be like this much legs and then like this much screen, and it's just like, oh god, this is not working. So in the future, we're gonna try to figure out a better solution to this that supports both like terrible old laptops and 4K screens. But it's challenging. Yeah. Our games are not like other games. We can't just like glue the UI to the side and just scale everything, you know, like or zoom in or what. It's tough. So
yeah,
we're working on it.
It's tricky. I mean, and this goes back to what I wanted to talk with Matt about, which is that so much of this game, for me at least, for people who are not like dedicated Zachtronics people, so much of the appeal is in the story. It's in the UI. It's in the style, and it's in the characters who are written and sort of like chat alongside the different challenges. And I feel like if I remember right, there was chat alongside some of the menus as well, which I thought was really charming.
Oh yeah, the options menu has a chat. Yeah, that was yeah.
It's got wizards in it. I like that a lot. But this is for both Matt and Zach. Like, I'm curious, as you're putting together a project like this, which side leads, if either? Is it we have some ideas for puzzles and then we're going to put a world and a story around that, or we have a cool idea for a world and characters and we're going to think about what kind of puzzles would make sense for those fictional characters?
Can I start?
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't know if you guys talked about you guys were talking before about
I talked about puzzle pitches.
We did the puzzle pitches. We start with like a puzzle, not with an idea for a mechanic, but with a story pitch for it. Did you guys talk about the world before puzzle pitches?
No.
So in Space Chem, I just came up with a bunch of abstract puzzles, and then we just sort of fit them into a story. And it's weird because like you've got this story going on, and then you go off and make ethylene, and the story has nothing to do with ethylene. And this is one of the complaints that we got from not even that many players, but I really took it to heart that it's like, why the hell are you making ethylene when there's like space monsters? It doesn't make any sense. And so that was where the story, the puzzle pitch thing came from. Like we did a little bit in Infinifactory, but I think Shinjin.io was really like when we like nailed down the puzzle pitch style. Yeah, so that's totally our way of doing it. And now you can talk about it because my throat is going out of me. So
Sure. So I mean, it really starts with kind of things that we're curious about. I mean, Shinjin.io started when Zach was like kind of tinkering with electronics and started reading about where electronics come from, and watched some documentaries and read some books and things, and sort of learned about this world that's in Shenzhen. Mm-hmm. And then, you know, because we were naturally curious about it, we decided to make a game about sort of around those themes. And similarly with Opus Magnum, I think it's just, you know, we have this idea for like this world and this idea for like kind of the sense of the story that we want to tell. And then there are also like these mechanics that Zach has in mind for like what the design space of those mechanics will be. So it's really, I think one of the coolest things about having a story is that it really helps you make your puzzles not just be like a set of arbitrary symbols that you're just pushing around for no reason, right? There's a purpose to it, and that helps not only the player like feel like they're actually doing something in the world instead of just manipulating these meaningless things, but also it helps the puzzle design process as well, right? Because it's like, well, we need a puzzle that actually kind of like tells this story, or we need a puzzle that like that will do this. And the state space of like possible puzzles is infinite, right? Like you could just make an infinite number of puzzles that just don't mean anything. So the story is a great like through line to like this is how you're going to intersect with this design space. Is you're going to go here, and you're going to go here, and you're going to go here, and you'll experience these different takes on what it is to like exist in this world, you know, through these mechanics and through these puzzles.
Yeah, I mean, certainly one of the things that has kept me interested in the work of Zachtronics over the years is this idea of feeling a very, from the outside, like what can be a very sterile, like precise mechanical game of putting things together to solve puzzles, and injecting it with the warmth of humans, of people. You know, something I think it was Zach, when you told me years ago when we were talking about TIS 100, which is a very different game. There was something you said about like, you know, these things we make, the things we create, they tell people who we are. And then in Shenzhen, like that really stuck out to me, Matthew, especially with the writing I think you guys did. This you have these coworkers that are sort of like sending emails back and forth to you, and you're getting these weird pitches for things you need to make for weird parties and events, and like through those puzzles you begin to understand this world you're inhabiting and these people you're working with. And it seems to be only that much stronger here in this game. Something that stuck out to me, the TIS 100 manual was rad. I haven't noticed, did you guys take a similar approach to this one, or is most of the narrative stuff tied up in the game itself?
This one is all in game. There's no component of like printing out a manual. TIS and Shenzhen both went pretty far down that road, and I think with Shenzhen we had this like 48-page manual and a binder. We made a binder and stuff, and we were kind of like, okay, this is like pretty far down that road. Let's turn around and, you know, explore something else. So
dial it back a little bit.
Yeah.
You can't have every game you make come out with a 50-page manual to learn how to play it. That's like a thing you get to do. It's like you have to earn that. Like you can't just do it every time.
Yeah. So everything, all of the information on how to play Opus Magnum is in the game. There's no extra bonus stuff that you need to like refer to. Hopefully.
Yeah, I took an untimely sip of water there, but what I wanted to do was jump in.
Yeah, too bad, Alex. I'm busting back in.
Do it.
Igor Scorched in chat would like to know, what is the process of designing a GUI layout for a 2D Zachtronics game?
Do you mean like technical or like design process?
I think technical and creative is what they're asking about. Like, I mean, you guys have great answers to both, so have at it.
I'm watching. Let me see. What is the process of designing a GUI layout for? Okay. Well, you can respond and create a design process. Okay. Yeah. I am reading the comments, so I can kind of see what you guys are saying. Oh God.
No pressure.
It's super iterative, right? I mean, usually from like
everything is gray boxed out.
Yeah. So it starts like I'll come up with an idea for the game. I'll sort of come up with like a really vague, terrible idea of like, this is what you do in this game. This is what it's about. And then I'll irresponsibly set Matthew to work immediately trying to come up with the story for it, even though I have no idea if the mechanics are any good. But sort of for me, like the way that I think through like what the game is about and what you do in it is sort of sketch out like, what does the UI look like? I mean, because the UI, like the drawing out like a UI is a way for me to sort of like simulate in my head what you do in the game, because you have to interact with this UI, and then that's setting like what you're able to do. And you know, like all like in Constructor, like a Flash engineering game, or a Flash game I made that's about engineering integrated circuits. You know, like the interface looks like a circuit, and so there's tools for drawing out the circuit. And then like when I start thinking about that, like clearly that's where the mechanics of the game come from. And so I usually sketch it out on paper, and then like while I'm doing that, I'm thinking through the mechanics of how the game works. I do a lot of like simulating stuff in my head. I know that like some game designers are like really all about prototyping. Like they'll just prototype crazy shit and they'll just prototype and change and change and change. I do a lot of simulation in my head and then just sort of think through like intuitively like what do I think this will be like? Will this be unbalanced? It's really frustrating when I'm talking to like Keith, who's our other designer, because I'll be like, oh, and this mechanic and this mechanic and this mechanic. He's just like, okay, this doesn't mean anything to me. I'm like, oh, but I can feel like how it works and I can feel that it'll be a good game. And he's just like, okay. And so it's like, okay, I guess I just have to like follow through and implement it. But I'll sketch it out on paper. I'll do mock-ups in Photoshop, just like really like I like doing like really like just black and white pixel art, really simple gray box stuff, and then we'll try to transition that into the game and we'll experiment with it, and like obviously some of it's not going to work, and so we'll fix the stuff that doesn't work, and like we'll discover that we need new features or that we made like huge miscalculations about what this game was about and what's interesting, and just keep refining it as that happens. And then once we sort of like lock down the functionality in the game or have like a good idea where that's going, we'll hand it off to the artists who will start figuring out how to make it look interesting. And like while I'm doing my gray boxing, they'll be sort of prototyping out concepts for like what the UI could look like and like what it draws from. So like in Shenzhen, I think like some of the early interface stuff was like Kyle was looking at like a bunch of like anime interfaces for inspiration. And for this, like, you know, it's looking up lots of like clockworky stuff and lots of stuff about, because we didn't want it to be steampunk specifically. So he looked at a bunch of like actual like watchmaking stuff.
Yeah, I am. This is just an aside. We should talk about the actual iterative process of building upon the foundation that you established almost 10 years ago to build this. But just an aside, like I'm not very far in the game, but it's really nice to see a game about alchemy that doesn't have a lot of old white dudes and long beards like hunched over.
Oh yeah,
like it's got an interesting cast. They've got interesting stories and backgrounds. It's got beautiful like just set piece art there in the back, and it has a unique look. That you're right. I hadn't really thought about it, but steampunk would be so easy to just drop all this stuff into, and it doesn't. It sort of like circumvents that in a really elegant way.
Kyle was adamant that like it cannot be steampunk, and I told him, I mean, we made a steampunk game like years ago. We're done with that. It's a terrible trend. So he was adamant that it did not look like steampunk.
Yeah, we also really did want like a cast of characters that didn't look like your typical like you said, old white guys.
Merlin.
It's kind of,
It's like bent over retort or something. Yeah,
we wanted to go very far away from that, and so
it's modern alchemy.
It was kind of hard to figure out, right? Like, and it was hard to talk about because we couldn't just say, oh, it looks like this and it looks like that. So because we were kind of trying to do something that we could only picture in our heads instead of just like finding some direct reference to.
Yeah, that's true. It's easy. I've pretty much forgotten how much we struggled with that early on in the project.
It was a little hard to talk about. It was hard to describe.
How did you solve that? I mean, it sounds like it was pretty challenging to try and like really establish a clear vision for what this game should be.
I mean, we just kept talking about it a lot, and Kyle and Jonathan kind of made some stabs at it. Trying to interpret what we were saying, and I think they got it. It was
lots of contradictory direction from me. That's too fantasy. Oh, that's not fantasy enough. Oh, but that's too fantasy.
Too technical.
It was literally just back and forth over and over again, just like how much fantasy. Because like at some points it wasn't fantasy enough, and at some points it was too fantasy. And it's
we were trying
what does it even mean?
Yeah, it was hard to describe. I remember trying to couch it in these terms of like, it's a little bit like Final Fantasy 15, where, you know, it's like they have like magic spells and stuff, and it's like ornate, but then they also have like people just in modern clothes and like cars and stuff.
Yeah.
And it's okay. It's
except
cool.
We don't have any magic.
Except
right? And we don't have people wearing suits.
Except
so take Final Fantasy 15 and then rearrange all of the elements while keeping their proportions.
Yeah, it's like that combination. That's the thing that was like, I don't know. But it's a world where alchemy is not magic. Alchemy is a science. It's like the science of this world.
Yeah, it's supposed to be like for me. I always imagined it, and this is not like was not good direction because it didn't really clearly paint it. But like, it's like cyberpunk, but except if the technology was all very different. And so like you get like, instead of big corporations, you have powerful houses, but you still have like the sort of like macro structures that you would find in like a cyberpunk city. And you still, I mean, we ended up with a lot of neon light, right? Which kind of makes you think a little bit like that. But it also has to look super fantasy. Like we don't want them to look like modern office buildings. And so you get, like lots of roofs. the roofs are where you can kind of tell that, you know, like, that helps to make it more fantasy.
Yeah, so I can imagine that it was a little bit frustrating to be an artist working for Zach at this time, because it was like
always frustrating to be working for Zach.
I'm going to say something I just said in chat, which is, for the record, I'm going to do these puzzles terribly.
It's okay.
The next question comes from Yanris Hadam. They've almost finished the game, and their primary question was, were different size cycles supported by the game at some point, or same size cycles were same size cycles decided very early and were never questioned?
Oh, I think that, I'm guessing by same size cycles, you mean like having all the program arms have the same period. I'm guessing.
I have to guess that too.
I think so, yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if they respond quickly if they're paying attention. Yeah. But I'm going to assume that's what they're saying.
There's a 20-second delay, so feel free.
Oh, okay.
Feel free to just scratch your beard for
Phil.
Cool. Well, that killed 20 seconds.
Yeah,
yeah. Yeah, that's actually always been a part of the game. So obviously, if you've played the Codex of Alchemical Engineering, all of your arms can have different periods. It raises the skill ceiling and makes it an interesting game, and it also makes it impossible for most people to play. So one of the, I would say, like the core innovation of Opus Magnum is realizing that, hey, we can take the cool, like the thing that was really cool about the Codex, and why it kind of put us on the map for these kind of games, is that it's really cool to build these little machines where all the stuff is like clockwork, right? It's cool to lay out these clockwork mechanisms. But I wanted to figure out, how can we have that cool clockwork mechanism thing, but make it actually a thing that many people can play, and they don't have to just like struggle with the most basic stuff, right? Like that, if they don't have to struggle to build a basic solution, it means that they can enjoy optimization, which is arguably one of the most fun parts of these games. Mm-hmm. And so the core idea of Opus Magnum is, okay, what if we can take the, like in Codex of Alchemical Engineering, you programmed each arm individually, and they had their own programs, they had no spatial connection to each other. In Opus Magnum, you get the program grid, which is where you can program a whole bunch of things in parallel, but you can like offset them from each other, and it automatically makes them have the same periods. That way they automatically loop, and it just makes it really, like, it's actually the funny thing, when we were playtesting, people like struggled to explain to us how it was working. Like when people start playing the game, they have no idea how any of the looping behavior works. But despite that, they're all able to do it, and they're all able to build solutions with it, and they're all able to learn it. And so sort of weirdly, we made something that's like really complicated and actually like very difficult for new players to explain, but they intuitively understand it. And for me, that's important. That's what counts. And so that's sort of how we've arrived at what we have now. And yeah, it's always been fixed period. I think that's an important part of the game. Hypothetically, I guess you could remove that restriction. You would have a different game though, right? And you would have a game that I think would throw off a lot of people at the beginning. And this is something that we definitely struggle with constantly, which is, how do we make a game that people can start playing, but also a game that people can play for a very long time and get very into? And this is a problem that every game designer struggles with, right? Like, that's, how do you make a game that has a low skill floor and a high skill ceiling?
Yeah, I mean, that matches my experience, where I don't fully understand how I can do what I'm doing, but I can sort of kludge the pieces around so that I can create delays and stuff and line timing up correctly. And it's been interesting to sort of play with that UI and sort of figure out how it works. It's very intuitive.
I say this as I'm watching the playing in the background. I'm struggling on this puzzle. Yeah.
I'm not having a bad time, for the record. Like, I'm enjoying myself. I'm just enjoying myself while 56 people watch me like completely screw up. So that's the negative end of the experience right here. The screwing up and not getting it is fine.
I love that people stream our games, but I don't know why they do.
Like, do you want to feel like an idiot? Stream this game. Do you want to feel smart? Play this game. Do you want to feel like an idiot? Stream it.
Yeah. It's a weird thing. Like, streaming is like arguably important in like promotion for games today, but it's like our games are terrible for streaming. You can stream them, and some people do, but we're at a very strong disadvantage in that space. But yeah. I like to think that we make up by having games that are actually fun to play. So
I'm actually gonna, like, you do have a cool feature that I used a few minutes ago, which is you have a GIF exporting feature, which people can then use to, like, I've seen, like, I found out about this game because everyone was streaming it on Twitter, or not streaming on Twitter, they were putting those GIFs on Twitter. So I'm curious, like, when did you think of that feature, and how much important do you think it is to create for certain game designers to create export tools to make people be able to clip their work and share it easily?
It's something that we started doing this in Space Chem.
Yeah.
In Space Chem, we had a thing that when you solved a puzzle, it would record a video and then upload it to YouTube. And when we were getting close to finishing Infinifactory, I was implementing the same thing. But I was like, wait, nobody even uses YouTube anymore. Like, this doesn't even, like, and it's like a YouTube video of like an Infinifactory solution isn't very good. And like, I actually just sort of shelved the feature and we didn't ship it. And then about a month after the game came out, I saw that one of our like power fans had made a looping GIF of one of their solutions from like a single perspective, and it just loops seamlessly because it's a GIF, and most of the time solutions for our games loop infinitely. And I can see you in the comments, Shadow Cluster. So and so most of the time this is the thing. And so as soon as I saw that GIF, it just like flashed in my mind. I'm just like, holy shit, I can take our video recording that we didn't ship, and I can totally like change this up to record looping GIFs. And so I just sort of like deep dove into that for 2 days, and just like bam, like we had a GIF creator, and so we shipped it, and it was amazing. And a bunch of people made GIFs. It's awesome because they loop seamlessly. I put them everywhere. It was just the coolest thing. It's probably like one of the coolest things I've ever made. And and so when we started, I guess immediately after that, we made TIS 100 and then Shenzhen IO. Neither one of them makes sense for looping GIFs. But when we came up with the idea to do this game, obviously, like GIFs were part of our strategy from the beginning, and we've really refined it in here. The fact that it's 2D means you don't have to like angle for the perfect perspective. We've branded the GIFs so they have the game's title at the top, and they have your score and the puzzle information at the bottom. Yeah, I don't even remember what your question was, but yeah, the GIFs are awesome.
That was pretty good. Space CDK says they're pronounced with a hard G, whether they are GIFs or GIFs.
Matthew says GIF all the time because that's what the creator of the GIF file format called it. I think it's terribly wrong. But
both are understood. Let us embrace all the GIFs.
Every time somebody says GIF, I just like cringe a little bit.
I've been saying GIF actually.
The author is dead. It's GIF.
I feel bad. You should be able to call it whatever you want. A HIF. Animated HIF.
I say GIF at home, and then I say GIF at work.
Because code switching. Yeah.
Exactly.
You gotta.
Taraka says they love the hexagons for this game, and I do too. I love like this game feels very good. That was just commentary. Zach and Matt, I do have another question for you. What do you think is the value of games where the interface that you're using as a player is the same interface that essentially, like, it's the whole thing, like, it's wholly intuitive, right? Like, in theory, like, there is a young alchemist out there who is using some kind of device to interact with these loose programming commands for this machine. And it's the same thing I'm doing out there. What do you think is the value of that in terms of making good experiences that feed into that story you were talking about?
Like the sort of like the Papers, Please phenomenon?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, it is the story, right? Which is a really cool thing, which is that, like, you know, the main character, Anateus, has to solve all these problems, and you're kind of doing that with him. So it is the story of like solving these problems kind of is the story of the game, right? And then the stuff that happens and the little dialogues that happen are just kind of little pieces of glue that bring you from one to the next, I think. So it brings you, I think, a lot closer to what the story actually is, and it makes you feel like, you know, when Anateus says he feels like a genius, hopefully you also feel like a genius because you've solved these puzzles, you know?
Yeah. I think if you make games that are about interfaces, I think it's super important that your story is about the interfaces, right? Because otherwise you've got like so I don't even know what the opposite, like people talk all the time about ludonarrative dissonance, and I don't even know what the opposite of that is, but like that's the demon that's always at my back, at least, is that like I want to make these games that are actually kind of abstract and kind of about engineering systems, and they don't really pair well with stories or feelings. And the thing I'm always afraid of is that we're going to make a game that's we've done it in the past a bunch of times. Like I think that's one of my weaknesses as a game designer, is creating things that inherently have a lot of like ludonarrative dissonance. And that's why we brought Matthew in full time as like a core part of our creative team to do stories and music, is to try to like, I think he gets Zachtronics games and like can infuse and like keep us from making these things where it's just like there's story over here and there's gameplay over here and they have nothing. Never will they meet, So, but I think that means like, the way to prevent ludonarrative dissonance is to make it so your story is your gameplay. And if you're making a game about an interface, it means you have to have a story about an interface, which is a really unfair thing to hoist on like a talented writer. Like, I guess that's why it's a job.
It's an interesting space to work in, especially when it's like there's a story. A lot actually happens in this story, and there's a lot of things that happen sort of off screen. Because we actually wanted to tell a story about things that actually happen in this world, and like people kind of have to like infer it from the dialogue, because we didn't have like the budget to like create this huge scene where like big things happen, right? Like there's no like cut scene with beautiful 3D rendered like people or anything like that.
Yeah. So, I think that the rule for me is that we don't actually have the budget to show anybody stabbing anybody else. And so anything at that level has to be done off screen, because we just all we can do is have people talk and not stab each other. So anything that's like stabbing grade interaction has to happen off screen. And that's been pretty challenging.
Mm-hmm.
Congratulations, Brian, on your solution.
I did.
You did it.
I did.
Yeah,
I like how, like, what it was like. This is the strangest thing I've seen in a puzzle game in a while. Busuma says, now on to the real puzzle, so I feel real smart. I actually threw out my solution a lot there. I threw out, like I had something, I had an idea I was working with, and then as I was getting, like, new perspectives from the chat, I was like, everything I've built is worthless. I'm going to start over, but I don't feel like, even though on the screen there's nothing there, in my head, it feels like I've accumulated that experience there, and I'm inputting that into the new iteration I'm trying. So I was happy with that. That was a good feeling.
You did great.
Thank you.
Yeah,
That's
what we like. That's what we like to see, which is that you didn't level your character up. You yourself in your brain leveled up, and that's how you're able to play the game.
Yeah. I guess like I will. Okay, that's actually a good jumping off point. So there's a lot of question in games about these days about progression systems, right? And how you track and reward player progression. And you just talked about a very loose end of it. Like the positive feeling there is just getting it, letting me make the GIF and look at the leaderboard. Those are maybe the most like physical reward things, but other games, especially mobile games, are very quick to like build UXs that have all these pinging noises, like have these pleasant sounds and animations. They use leveling up systems, they use loot boxes, like these are things that are, I think some people are like the concept of bad UX or harmful UX is something that people are thinking about now. How do you like think of, like, have you thought about that? How do you reward players in your puzzle games and stuff, and you seem very averse to those solutions?
I think about this a lot.
Yeah.
Can I soapbox for a minute?
Yeah,
Matthew?
soapbox.
Please.
So I've done a lot of soul searching about this over the years. I think like the important thing to probably put in here is that a lot of times as a game designer I feel like a failure because they're like our games are not that popular, right? And in the scheme of things, like they're actually like there's a lot of people who are less popular, I guess, than us. But I'm very aware of how not popular our games are in the scheme of games. Yeah. And I've spent a lot of time over the past few years. You'd never be able to tell by the games that we actually ship, but I spent a lot of time looking at the games that are out there, looking at what's popular, and trying to think like, God, what can we do to make a popular game? And we notice a lot of the stuff that's going on and a lot of the mechanics that go into these games, and like that they have like systems where you mine for resources and systems where you artificially progress and all of this stuff. And we've even explored the ideas of making some of those. And you know what? Like I literally just couldn't give fewer shits about this stuff. It's like it's so fake, and like I guess most of the games that are on PC aren't that bad, but like when you start getting into mobile, like some of them are downright like it's dark, right? I mean, like people are making games for kids and trying to get them hooked on like stuff that doesn't exist, so that way they can take their money, right? I mean, it's like it's crazy, and people are employing like a lot of stuff that is like addictive design. When people started doing microtransaction stuff, I was sort of like I was dumb and young, and I was against it and thought it was stupid. And then I was, and and people said like, oh, like, well, if people are having fun, like, what's wrong with them having fun the way they want? And it's like, I was just like, and then I guess I stopped being really against it. And then like within the past 2 years, I've suddenly like gone like way back to where I used to be, which is just like, holy shit, these people have no morals. They're making stuff that's not culturally relevant. Like, I want nothing to do with that. And I guess fortunately I have no desire to make stuff like that, but like I still feel guilty that I'm not making stuff that's like stealing people's money, right? Because like, I'm a game designer. Hypothetically, that's a commodity, and I could be making games that are way better games that like make more money by being like, by giving people a false sense of progression. But it's just like, I just am not interested in that. There's something really compelling about making these games that have like a real, like, you're honestly like doing something. I mean, I guess you're not doing something because it's fake and it's alchemy, but like you're really like having to learn a system and how to use it. We have some people in our office who play fighting games, and like I got like an arcade set up for us so I can like learn fighting games, and I want to learn and get better. I'm really bad at it. I've always been really bad, but I really, really respect the fact that these are games that are just about skill, and you really do have to learn and get better. And it's like, God damn, that's like a real thing. That's like as close as games get to being real, maybe. But at the same time, they're also not popular. So I don't know what it says. I mean, I could keep going on and get like into like really dark stuff about like people and human behavior and like how everything is designed to manipulate us now. I don't really have anything good to say there. I don't know.
I know that
an unstructured rant.
I know. Okay. I'm gonna like this is one of those weird places where I'm going to like ask if you can moderate your opinion. But what do you think? There's kind of a line to walk, right? Like, not every developer has the luxury to try and make rewarding games without use of those either microtransactions or something like that. Like, what do you think developers who are working on those kinds of games could learn from the success of Zachtronics games? Because they are, like you said, they're not dropping millions in people's laps, but they do have a fan base and they do sell on Steam. What do you think is the one thing that your games do well that other game designers who use microtransactions or those kind of UX things in their work could borrow from? I'm kind of like, what do you think though that they need to moderate on, essentially, to not rip off money from kids?
I don't know. I mean, like, I think it's hard to talk about this without getting into like a weird thing where like maybe it's okay to rip off kids, right? Because like our society embraces it, and like so the thing I'm much more confident now than I used to be, and I'm confident about our games being what they are. And I don't think they have to be something else. But by like the same thing, I don't think that other people's games have to be something else.
Right.
Like like they're doing something that's okay in as far as society is concerned, and like they're putting food on people's tables, right? And like I don't think they have to learn anything. I don't think they have to moderate themselves. But at least I have the knowledge now to know that I don't want to do that. And I think that's important, sort of like a live thing too. Like,
I think that's very, and actually, if I were to tell like other developers one thing, that is actually what I would say, which is like, you have control over what you're making, and you have control over like how you want, what you put into the world. You actually have more control over that than you think, and it's, I think when you start out in games, it's thrilling just to be making games at all, and you don't necessarily always think about the consequences of what you make, or like what you make like is telling others. But like when you do come to that stage, I think you should think about it, and I think it's okay to start thinking about that, and really considering, why you're doing what you're doing, and having that like maybe a little bit of an artistic crisis, right? Where you ask yourself, why am I doing this? What is the point of my life? And why am I designing these things for people? What benefit am I bringing to humankind? Those are the kinds of questions that I would like more developers to ask themselves. And that's an incredibly philosophical and maybe asshole-ish thing to say in answer to your question, but that's kind of where I think we want to go with that, right? Instead of saying, "Hey, just take this little design bit from this game."
Add histograms.
And add histograms to your mobile. It's not really like that, right? It's like choose what game you want to make. Like, think about it more carefully than you have in the past. That's really our answer.
Yeah.
That sounds way smarter coming out of your mouth than mine.
Okay. Well, I was just kind of
what Matthew said.
I think it's a really good point to raise, and I think obviously it comes wrapped up in so much other stuff. One of which being the business of making a living as a game developer, right?
Mhm.
Sometimes you have more control than other times, depending on who you're working for and what you're working on. And let's dig into that for a minute for Zachtronics. I kind of want to know how. I don't want to know like how this game has done. It's been in early access for not too long, I don't think. But what factors influence the way you approach the business of this? I noticed you launched it in early access. You put a big disclaimer that it's basically done, and it's probably going to be the shortest early access period of any of your projects. But you still went with that, and I kind of want to know why, from a business perspective.
Yeah, I mean, because I feel like okay. So the early access thing is complicated because it turns out that early access means a lot of things to a lot of people. When I look at it, I see it as it is a label that you can either apply to your Steam game or not apply to your Steam game, and that's it. It doesn't change anything else. And despite the fact that it means a lot of things to a lot of different people, when I look at that label, I think that we're better off applying that label to our games when they come out than not. And I think the evidence for that is that the game has been out for 2 weeks. We have changed a lot of stuff. We did not get a lot of stuff right the first time. Just 2 days ago, I added a new feature to try to stop players from doing something. And then after thinking about it more, I realized, you know what? I think I was wrong. And so I rolled it back last night and then went to bed. And it's I mean, like, you could hypothetically do this with a game that's not early access, right? Like, people change games after they come out all the time. For me, I think that putting that label on there sets expectations correctly. And I think that oftentimes when you're communicating with people, that is the most important thing, right? It is just setting expectations, especially when you're selling somebody something. They're giving you money in exchange for an unknown quantity. You have to telegraph those expectations about what you're giving them well, especially if it's going to change. And so early access is maybe not the perfect label for our games. Maybe if there was a third label that was like, it's almost done, but it's technically not done yet, like access, like that's kind of clumsy. But if we could roll something like, if we could apply like a label like that, maybe that would be more appropriate. But for the situation we're in right now, we have these two choices, and we choose the one we do because I think it's better for telegraphing like how we feel about the development process. It lets people know that when you find something in the game that you hate, you shouldn't just write a negative review and say, God, the developers don't get it. This is terrible. It's like we're trying to say, no, we think we're wrong. Please tell us what you think. Like, this is not permanent. I guess for me it sort of stems. We started doing this with Infinifactory. When Ironclad Tactics came out, we definitely had the opinion that like we're gonna, we plan to fix this game and make it better and learn from what players say. But early access wasn't really a thing then, or we didn't think it applied. Like we should do it. And like the game came out, and a bunch of people are like, "Oh, this game's out and has this flaw and it sucks." It's like we actually fixed that like a week and a half after the game came out, but everybody thought it was done. And so maybe early access swings a little bit too hard in the other direction, but. Hold on, my cat is pawing at me.
Wait, show the cat.
Hi, cat.
Show the cat.
It's
Bring him
cute,
on.
but like also like, can you see him?
Oh, there's a kitty.
He's literally like grabbing. Oh no, he's coming up. Okay, this is happening.
What's his name? We got to welcome him on.
Yeah, we gotta
name
welcome
is-
the cat on the stream.
Welcome Zaphod to the podcast.
Hi,
Nice.
Zaphod.
This is tail.
Yep, there's his tail. Sorry,
Very
is this?
cool.
Should I kick him out or is this?
No.
Good.
Cats are good. This is the second cat who's made it onto the Gamasutra Twitch channel.
That's right.
Okay.
Sorry, I have completely lost my train of thought. Yeah,
That's-
so early access. That's our take.
Yeah. Okay. We're running out of time, which is a problem because we could go for another hour. I'm gonna pull a question from the chat from Lunoland. What do you all think about the roguelike format where the character levels up, but also your knowledge levels up? The classics can still be quite grindy. Do you both hate grinding? Is there something to be said about games as efficacy simulators, like you feel like you're achieving something, but it's just an artificial reward cycle? Can this be done responsibly? This is just kind of a great question, so nice
Yeah,
one, Lunoland.
Can I give a terrible answer?
Sure.
Which is just that I try to be motivated just by making the stuff that I want to make,
Mhm.
and that's sort of how we make that decision, right? And so Matthew's said this thing before, which is just that like if you're going to create something, you should create something that interests you, that you're curious about, right? People say write what you know, but maybe you should write what you're curious about. And that's what I do with our games. Is that I don't make games about stuff I know. I make games about stuff I'm curious about as a way to explore it. And at no point do I really. I mean, if I really wanted to explore making like the most manipulative, like microtransaction-y game, I would probably do it. Yeah, no, like I try to follow my heart and what interests me, and that's at the end of the day, that's really what drives like our business decisions, right? I mean, the goal for me is like, how can I follow my heart and make stuff that both I and the people I work with want to make, and not go out of business doing it. And it's hard because, like, you know, a lot of people do the same thing and do go out of business, right? Like, it's not a recipe for success. I wouldn't advise that anybody else follow their heart, but I am, like, hashtag blessed enough to, you know, to get to do what I want and make the games that interest me, and then I, you know, and learn more about myself and about the world by doing this.
I want to add that, like, we don't really have a problem with grindy games just, like, existing. Like, we actually kind of, we play those games when we go home. Like, I know I certainly do. I play idle clicker games. I play, you know, RPGs. I play all kinds of games where you grind and level up, and I don't really have any problem with them. I enjoy some of them sometimes. But as a developer, I feel like it's just less of a challenge to just come up with, like, oh, here's a ladder that players can climb. So, like, when we're thinking about something that we make as developers, we definitely, like, make one type of game, but that doesn't mean that, like, we're saying, like, other types of games are bad and that no one should play them or anything like that. Like, there's certainly a place for them, and I enjoy them very much. It's just they're just less interesting to make. That's, I think, my take on it.
Yeah, I agree.
Right. Brian, do you want to pull some more questions? Do you have any?
Yeah, we could do, like, rapid fire
okay,
questions.
Rapid fire. Jan Rashashtim is back. By looking at all the puzzle games that get released, Zachtronic ones stand out a lot by being extremely open-ended on how a user can solve the puzzles. Are you ever planning to do more classic puzzle games where there's a preset solution? Is that even interesting to do?
Never. I've never made a puzzle game like that, and I hope to never do that. If I start doing that, you know that something's wrong. Or I've really gotten a weird interest in puzzle games like that, but I don't see that happening.
I got one here from Senryoku Pew, which is, do you have any plans of adding a more detailed leaderboard? I guess no, since it hasn't changed, but I'm interested in hearing your reasons why.
Depends on what you mean.
That's a good point. I thought it was actually more detailed than I expected, because there's 3 different metrics by which you can sort of track your progress.
Yeah. We've explored a lot of ideas around making the histograms more deep or interesting. When we come up with something that we like, we will do it. I guess the fact that we haven't done anything new means that we haven't found anything that we like. You should email me if you have a great idea.
People want to know when the loop from here feature will come out. I guess that's.
Oh God, I rolled back the change, so technically you're welcome to make terrible non-looping solutions. It's on. Okay, so this is the honest thing is that, like, we have a hard time judging how many people would benefit from such a feature or how many people would be confused by it, and then we have to weigh that against, like, the cost if we could create more content. Right, and it's a struggle. We make bad decisions a lot of times, but we do have to prioritize what we work on. So you know, just keep giving me feedback, keep talking about it. If a lot of people, we try to do the thing that looks like it'll create the most enjoyment for all of our players. But it's not just like a democracy, because also, like, if somebody's going to play the game for 100 hours, we care about them more than somebody who plays the game for an hour and refunds it. So, like, it's, you know, it's a tough balance, and we're terrible at it. So I'm sorry.
It's an ongoing. The answer is it's an ongoing thing that we're still talking about, right?
Yeah, right on. There's a simple question way back from MyBlow. Which came first, Sigmar's Garden or the Transmutation Engine puzzles?
Oh, Sigmar's Garden was a very late game addition, because for the longest time, oh God, okay, so before it was Sigmar's Garden, it was a hex-based war game.
Sure.
We had just gotten into, like, tile-based hex war games, and so I tried so hard to put, like, a little hex-based war game in the game, and it just sucked and kept sucking, and I was like, oh, what about this, guys? And, like, nobody understood how to play it, and it was just, finally I just had to, like, chop it off, removed it from the game. I made Sigmar's Garden in, like, a couple hours, and it was already way better than the thing that I was trying to push for months.
Oh, speaking of, like, games within games, we didn't talk between last time when you put out Shenzhen and this, but, like, what happened with Shenzhen Solitaire? Did you release that as, like, a separate game? What was the thinking behind that, and how did it do?
Solitaire games sell sometimes, right? It was easy to force to spin it off. We sold it on PC, it's on iOS, and it's on DOS. We did best on the DOS version, actually. We made way more money on the DOS version.
Of course.
Yeah, because it's fun, because it's interesting, you know, that it exists for DOS. On any of those other markets, it's just another solitaire game in a huge sea.
Yeah, and specifically a solitaire game that has terrible, like, reward mechanics, that doesn't fucking give you coins or hugs and kisses or whatever the ones do to motivate people. So it's actually very unpopular. It's just a very
type
it's
of
like
solitaire as well.
Oh gosh, is
it's
that
like,
what people want from solitaire now?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think people who play, like, games like solitaire are more casual players.
Yeah,
who really do.
That's
like,
not fair. That's not fair. Sorry, that was Just I'm used to solitaire as just like a simple card UI on my Windows machine. That's
Yeah.
Some-
I mean,
some
how
of them
often do you
are
play
s-
solitaire?
That's true.
Right? And how often do you buy a solitaire game or put money into it?
Not as much
I think
as
a lot of
they
the people
do.
who really play those games, like a lot of people, it turns out most human beings respond to all the stuff that Facebook and microtransaction-y games and mobile games are doing, and that's why they're doing it.
Yeah.
Right? We don't have to judge it, but like it works.
All right, let's go out on one last question, okay? You guys ready? Shadow Cluster back in chat asks, you use grids, 3D spaces, and hexagonal grids. Are you going to challenge non-Euclidean planes anytime soon?
I don't even know what that would mean.
I
I'm
don't
not
know.
that smart. Some people make the mistake of thinking that I'm smart because I make these games. I'm not that smart. You guys are smarter than me. Sorry.
Zachtronics Adventure would be very difficult to predict what your solutions would do.
Could you make a
Yes.
Zachtronics adventure game? Point and click adventure.
Oh,
Sorry, that
we-
was just a dumb.
We had thought of that in the past. It's probably a bad use of resources. I think point and click games are like super dead.
We've talked about all kinds of things. That's another. That's kind of maybe an interesting note to go out on, which is that we talk about a lot of ideas. We don't come into work just thinking we'll just make the next Zachtronics game. Like we really do think about lots of different ideas, and so we talk about different genres and we talk about different kinds of games, and so up until now, it just hasn't made sense. But you never know. You never know what will happen.
Yeah.
I've always liked the idea of like a giant open world puzzle game. I think we talked about it years ago. There's a story on the site about an idea for something called the Second Golden Age.
That's honestly, I think that is what kicked off this whole new era of Zachtronics games, right? Because I think that was really where we honed the idea of puzzle pitches, even though we never made the game. I don't like talking about it because everybody's like, "Oh, you should make that game." But
No, don't make that game. Just make all the games inside that game.
exactly, yeah. That whole idea of like of puzzles that really tell a story, I think, is where a lot, like for me, that's where a lot of my enthusiasm for the puzzle pitch style comes from.
Yeah, and it's been fascinating to see Zachtronics' work evolve and sort of shift and become more. I hope it doesn't take us the wrong way. More human and like more warm. So I think that's going to do it for us. We're over our hour.
Darn it. Yeah, this was fun. I like this game.
Yeah.
I'm gonna probably keep playing this game. It's just a good
Good video game.
It makes me feel smart when no one's watching, and it makes me feel dumb when 62 people are watching.
Hot
So-
form.
I will commence the closing ceremonies while just swinging things around here. You have been listening to the Gamasutra Twitch channel. Thank you all so much for watching today and asking questions. If you enjoyed this conversation with Zach and Matt, we would appreciate it if you clicked the follow button down in the lower end of the screen, because if you click that and you make sure your notifications are on, you will get a pop-up when we are going live. And we tend to go live when we're interviewing game developers about their work. Sometimes we're just trying out new games and giving our commentary on them. Occasionally we do roundtables, though we haven't done those in a while and we really should. Mostly we like this to think of this as like Gamasutra.com in video form, where we try to talk about the art and business of making games as it relates to people who are interested in making games. And with that, Zach and Matt, thank you so much for joining us today. This was a blast.
Thanks for having us.
If they have dev questions, where should they contact you?
Oh, you can email me, Zach@Zachtronics.com. It's all over the internet. It's not hard to find. Just email me and we can talk about whatever.
Sweet. Awesome.
Yeah.
With that, thank you all and have a lovely day. Bye.
Bye. Bond. Just all later.